Hi, everyone. It's about 1 o'clock on March 25th. And we are officially calling this meeting of the Ag Innovation Board to order. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded as public record, and that participation in a recorded meeting will be deemed as consent to be recorded, including statements both written and oral. Public records, including this recording, can be requested at any time in accordance with the Vermont Public Records Act. So welcome, everybody. Let's see, I'm just going to mark who we got. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Wendy Sue. And hi, Ryan. So let's, I guess just so we can get going, we'll start with our introductions, and we can start with our members that are online. So Wendy Sue, I see you. Why don't you go right ahead?
Hi, I'm Wendy Sue Harper. I'm a soil scientist, and I fill the soil biology position.
Thanks. Jonathan? We'll come back to him. Ryan?
Ryan Rebozo with the Vermont Center for Eco Studies.
Thanks, Ryan. Other Jonathan. Jonathan, you want to just do a quick introduction? Oh, we can't hear you, Jonathan. Yep, that's fine.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Okay, Jonathan, crop consultant. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I guess official members in the room.
Steve Doynell, Director, Farm, AG Agriculture Food Markets.
And I'm Morgan Griffith, also in the Farm Division of the Agency of Agriculture. And I guess we'll keep going around the room with introductions. Go ahead, Jill.
Jill Goss, Agency of Ag, Farm and Markets. Stephanie Smith with the Agency of Agriculture, Deputy Director of the Public Health Ag Resource Management Division.
Pam Breyer with Farm also.
Great. And then let's see who else we have on the call. I see Brooke.
Hi, everybody. Brooke Decker with the Agency of Agriculture in the Farm Division.
Thanks. Dylan?
Hello, I'm Dylan Gabbert. I'm with Bayer Crop Science.
Thanks. Clark?
Hello, Clark Parmley with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture.
Zach
Sikowski, also with the Agency of Agriculture.
And looks like we have Bruce Young. We're just doing a quick introduction.
Yes, Bruce Young, Bayer Crop Science.
Thank you. So we're pretty light on members today. I know that some are going to join us a little bit later. But I guess I will still ask about the meeting minutes that were shared for our February meeting. I didn't hear, I know Sarah Owen said that she accepted them. Does anybody else have any other edits that need to be done or anything, or do we accept the minutes that were shared for February?
I accept the minutes. I didn't have any edits or comments.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, and then just the only other thing that I wanted to say before we kind of got into the meat of things is that you should have seen some calendar readjustments. Thank you for those of you who filled out the poll for availability. So between April and May, so our typical fourth Monday of the month was going to fall on Memorial Day for May. And so we decided to split the difference and do one meeting for April and May together. So the day that we had the most people available for was the 20th of May. So we will not have a meeting at the end of April. And then the Memorial Day meeting got moved a week earlier to May 20th. So our next meeting will be May 20th. But same place here if you come in person in Williston, and it should be the same sign-in as the previous, as our whole series of Microsoft Teams. So other than that, we were going to just give a few, if we have any agency updates or legislative updates. Steve, go right ahead.
Yes, okay. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so we have a few updates. And I apologize, I think I missed the last meeting.
Mhm.
So, but at that meeting, I think you were told about 3 pieces of legislation that were being considered. One dealing with rodenticides, one dealing with PFAS, pesticides and PFAS, and the third dealing with neonicotinoid-treated seeds. So the status of those is the rodenticide bill, or the proposed legislation dealing with the rodenticides got extensively modified and essentially got reduced to a requirement that all the second generation anticoagulants be registered as restricted use pesticides, state restricted use. Of the 68 products that are already registered, second generations that are already registered in Vermont, all but 12 of them are already state restricted use. So this, the action will only affect 12 products, and we'll just re-register those as restricted use, state restricted use. So, you know, and we actually did the field agents went out and did a quick survey of how prevalent those products were in the marketplace, and they found, I think, 6 of them that were actually on shelves in very small numbers. So it's not going to have much of an impact, I don't think, on rodent control in the state of Vermont. So anyway, so that's that. The second is there was legislation dealing with PFAS. And Pam, do you want to just sort of update people where the current status of that?
Yeah, I pulled up the modified bill, and again, this is a bill that really changed. It had called for a ban on schools, towns, and the state from purchasing anything that contained a PFAS. And now it is a research project that is mainly focused in DEC. And I pulled open the bill so I wouldn't forget any of the 7 things that have to be included for what's going to happen next.
Where is your 7? Keep going.
Yeah, good. They got to keep going.
Strike all.
So they took out a lot of text, but DEC needs to, with cooperation of our agency, identify consumer products that could have an impact on public health, that could contain PFAS, figure out a mechanism. So this number 2 is actually a really interesting one. Manufacturers have to figure out how they know if their product contains PFAS. And that's because it's just really hard to render a teddy bear and test it for PFAS, or a cheese package, or a table. Like, this is a really broad sweeping bill where they want to prevent all PFAS from coming into every consumer product, but you simply can't test all consumer products that easily for PFAS. So that's one of the research aspects, is to figure out how to keep PFAS out meaningfully. And how, at one point, the committee wanted really for there just to be warning labels on things when they did have PFAS in them or not. So trying to understand if you can just require manufacturers to put a label saying this contains PFAS. That's number 3. Number 4 is figuring out who's going to do all this work. So is there going to be a PFAS registry? So what staff member at the state is going to be responsible for tallying what makes that call, and what is PFAS and what is not, what products are in and which products are not in. Number 5 also addresses some of the feedback the committee heard, where other states are working on this also. So let's learn from the other states, what has worked in other states and what has not as part of the research project. Number 6 is let's come up with some clear definitions, even something like intentionally added or consumer products need clarification, but also what is going to be a PFAS and what is not going to be a PFAS. So that definition of PFAS is part of the ongoing conversation. The committee at one point was really pushing for public service announcements from the Department of Health to warn people about drinking water from their private wells, from public wells, but also just the concept of PFAS exposure globally. So by November of the upcoming, this year, DEC has a report due to the legislature that covers all of these aspects. And that's where we are right now.
So, Anne has joined. Yeah, here's the report.
Yep, welcome, Anne.
Sorry, I had trouble getting on. I don't know why, but I'm here.
Sorry. Great, welcome.
Better late than never.
Okay, so any questions, I guess, for Pam about that piece of legislation? Did it pass the Senate?
Pass the Senate.
So that's going over to the House.
Yep.
Okay, and then the last piece we're going to talk about is House Bill 706, which is a bill to restrict the use of neonicotinoid pesticides. That bill also went through some significant changes, but there is a version that passed the House last week and has moved over to the Senate. I'm not going to pull it up or go through any of the provisions, just sort of summarize it real briefly. One is the two main components of it are that it would restrict the sale or use of neonicotinoid treated seeds as of January 1st, 2029. So there's like a 5-year or 4-year period, I guess, 4.5-year period to implement it. The other main provision is does restrict the use of neonicotinoid insecticides, period, for a number of situations, including torfin ornamentals, any blooming crop, any vegetable crop that's harvested before bloom or prior to bloom. No, excuse me, post bloom. Sorry, not prior to bloom, post bloom. And also, well, and then I guess I should have mentioned this. The provision of the existing law that charges the AIB with developing BMPs was modified to include adding BMPs for the use of neonicotinoid insecticides. So whereas, what the board considered over the last year and a half was best management practice for neonicotinoid treated seeds, if the bill gets passed and signed by the governor, then the AIB is going to have to develop recommendations for BMPs for the use of neonicotinoid insecticides, period. So there'll be an expanded ask. So anyway, that's where that bill is. It did pass the House, and it's on its way to the Senate. So I guess if anybody has any questions about that, we can try to answer those.
Is the, I don't know if we know this, so the BMPs for all neonics, is it still focused somewhat on the uses that would be restricted? Or it's just all for all?
BMPs for use of neonicotinoid insecticides.
Okay.
So it's pretty broad. So we got another 17 meetings coming up here.
Get ready. And we did have Amanda join. Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
Yeah, well, yeah. So Amanda, we just reviewed the existing legislation that has been considered so far, the three bills, where they're at.
And they, yeah, they've all made crossover and are on.
Right,
the
right,
side.
right. In their modified forms, right.
So speaking of BMPs,
Yeah,
I can pull that up.
that's a good segue. Yeah, go to 1.03, I think, which is on page 2. Okay, so as required by the legislation that was we've been working under, the agency or the secretary was required to submit best management practices for the use of neonicotinoid treated seeds by March 1st, in which we did. The secretary approved providing the set of BMPs that everyone was sent a copy of last week. We provided it to the House and the Senate Ag Committees on March 1st. And these BMPs were based on the recommendations of the AIB, in the sense that the AIB recommended additional research and education. And so these BMPs were put together in a way to allow that to still happen. So I guess one of the key points here is 1.03. I'll just read it. It says the following BMPs are established for appropriate use of insecticide treated article seeds. These practices are recommended best practices to be used whenever reasonable and practical. Additional or modified BMPs may be adopted as Vermont-based research evolves and provides more guidance. So that was very deliberate language to allow the research that the board has identified as needing to be done, and that we're in the process of developing with UVM. And these practices are recommended. They're not mandatory, because when the board considered all the different aspects of the use of seeds and all the information that was received, the recommendations were to continue to develop information and provide guidance and training to growers on how to properly use these materials, but not establish specific enforceable requirements on their use, because we're just not there yet. I mean, that's where we're at. So these BMPs were developed to meet the requirement of the law, but also accommodate the recommendations of the AIB. So that's why they're in the form they're at. They are in right now. So I guess I'll just stop there and see if people have any questions or discussions about that.
Where can these be found, this document?
Okay.
So right now, this document is on our Teams or SharePoint site. So where all of our agenda and meeting minutes are held. So it's under our topic of neonics and seed treatments. And then there's a BMP folder. And it stays under the draft BMPs. And so we have this, the PDF is what was submitted on March 1st. So that's what I'm sharing right now.
And the public can gain access to this document that was submitted via the legislative website.
Via the legislative website. Because it's being shared right now, I will put it for today's meeting materials
as well.
Right, and I'll just note too that I've been asked to testify about this on this coming Thursday, the House. Going over them with them on Thursday morning. And anybody from the AIB that wants to come with me is welcome.
I mean, that's said in jest, but
What's that?
but you're serious, right?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
anybody.
Yeah, if anybody wants to testify
any
about the DMP, that'd be great.
Member wants to come, and so I don't know if you wanted, did you want to go? I mean, we did send this out.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what, let's just talk about some of the general provisions. I mean, 1.03, that's the key thing about this whole thing. So I think, we had the potential to propose BMPs that were regulatory. But our thinking was, because of the discussions at the AIB and all the information and the sense that we weren't ready yet to prescribe specific things, we didn't do that. We proposed these as recommended best practices to be used whenever reasonable and practical. The other thing to keep in mind is this is intended to be rulemaking, okay? So rulemaking is a long process with a lot of public input. And so there's a lot of potential as we go through rulemaking to change pretty much everything in here. And that's, something to be aware of. The other thing is, if the legislation passes as written, we're going to have to go back and basically start over anyway, because they've expanded the scope of them to include neonicotinoid, the use of neonicotinoids, period. So depending on what what the House Ag Committee, what their comments are, and what their, and any potential changes in legislation, this is sort of a starting point, but the final form is probably going to look very different. So I tell you what, before we go through it, does anybody have any comments or questions about this? Just in general, or? Okay, well, let's just start. I'm not going to go through the definitions. If we can start on page 3 at 3.01.
Yep.
So one of the things to point out about this is that in general, all the language is should as opposed to shall. Shall being, enforceable, should being a recommendation or a, best practice. So I guess the first section, 3.01 and 3.02, deal with language that's on the label of the treated seed. And basically just says that, you should follow the label language. Regarding, proper handling, storage, use, and disposal, recommended rate, depth of planting, and hazard statements related to pollinators, which, and I believe this is true, the hazard statements related to pollinators come right off the pesticide itself that's used to treat this, correct?
I think that there might be on seed labels themselves.
Right, but they transfer. it
Right,
over
yeah,
to-
oh, that's what, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were saying you had to go back one label.
No,
it
it's on
doesn't.
the, yeah,
It is on
they
the
just
seed label.
copy whatever's on the label of the product, so. So that's, you know, the first part of it. Then the,
And there
other-
was, can I say one thing? The
Yeah.
reason, like, label was first on purpose.
Right.
Because some things are kind of duplicative
Right.
later on, but, you know, just like with pesticides, the label can come first. That's your first source of information. And so that was first on purpose.
Right. And then section 3.03 deals with the whole issue of dust. So a person using and let me back up too, I'm sorry. We wrote this to cover all insecticide treated, not just neonicotinoid. And that was because, well, two reasons. One is, if you recall, back in, I guess, it was February, we made a decision not to issue or not to recommend BMPs on non-neonicotinoid insecticide treated seeds because we were going to develop them for neonicotinoid treated seeds. So what we've done is combined both responsibilities for the BMPs. The other thing is that it looks like what's happened in Canada and is likely to happen in New York is that the seed treatments will transition from neonicotinoid insecticides to diamide insecticides. And so we want whatever BMPs we develop, ultimately in the rule to apply to both diamides and neonicotinoids. So that's that. So that's why we use the word insecticide treated article instead of neonicotinoid treated article. So the recommended BMP is that a person using an insecticide treated article should minimize dust generation and potential drift as follows. Avoid planting during windy conditions, handle seed bags carefully, use dust reducing seed lubricants, and avoid using lubricants that increase dust. Ensure the planter is calibrated, avoid or reduce releasing excess dust from the seed bag, including by loading planters at least 10 yards inside field borders, clean planting equipment without using compressed air, clean planting equipment without contaminating surface water and pollinator attractive habitats, dispose of excess rinse water from cleaning within the crop field and without causing surface ponding. Do not broadcast plant or scatter seeds to soil surfaces. In other words, they have to be incorporated in soil. Ensure all planted seeds are thoroughly incorporated during planting and evaluate whether additional incorporation is necessary to thoroughly cover any exposed seeds. Collect any seeds spilled during loading or planting and store them for subsequent planting, or dispose of any seeds in accordance with section 3.07. So, and Morgan, a lot of these come from other sets of recommendations, right, in other states.
Yep, so these are from, if you guys remember, we had a big Excel sheet of
Right.
kind of all best management practices, and they were pulled from the Corn Dust Research Consortium, Minnesota's best management practices, Connecticut has best management practices, ASTA has guidance, which I don't know what ASTA is.
American Seed Trade Association.
Thank you, Seed Trade Association. And I'm trying to think if there was another big one in there, but so basically they were kind of all pulled together, and then we talked about them, you know, as members, and we talked about ones that meant a lot to us, and if you remember those discussions, and so these were kind of ones that crept out of that big list that we had to, as far as importance, and then also kind of bang for your buck and not being redundant with other best management practices. But
Right. And I should also point out, I believe this is true, there are all the best management practices in other states are recommended voluntary best management practices, they're not regulatory enforceable practices.
the only one is Canada and their seed lubricant
Right. That's
requirement
really
is,
enforceable. Right.
right, a requirement.
Okay, so that's section 3.03, dealing with dust. And then I guess, I'm sorry to keep hopping around, but the other thing, we're actually in the process of developing a research project with UVM on dust and the dust generated from planting. And we've got a series of meetings coming up about doing that. So section 3.04 deals with integrated pest management. So a person using an insecticide treated article seed should implement integrated pest management practices to include learn which crop production practices increase or reduce risk, choose an appropriate rate of insecticide treatment that can effectively manage pests without over application, and utilize multiple pest management methods to avoid or reduce pest risk wherever feasible. They're pretty straightforward. What's not in this section is a requirement for scouting prior to using the seed. And that's specifically because the decision to use a treated seed is made prior to the time at which planting is going to occur. And scouting the field at the time or shortly before the time of planting doesn't give you the option. Well, it's too late. You've already decided to use a insecticide treated seed at that point. You've already purchased it. So anyway, that's the reason it does not include scouting. As a, typically would be an integrated pest management program, you would survey or scout the field to see what the pest pressure was and then make your management decision based on that. But that doesn't apply with the pests and the cropping system we're using. What does apply is decisions about what crop production practice you're going to use, whether you're doing no-till or minimum tillage or incorporating a cover crop. All those factors go into whether or not you're going to increase your pest risk. And so those are factors you can manage prior to the decision to use insecticide treated seed. Okay, the next section is communication continuous education. Any person using an insecticide treated article seed should provide at least 48 hours advance notice to all apiculturists who have established apiary on the premise. So that's real similar to our existing rule regarding insecticide applications. And then a person using an insecticide treated article seed should attend reasonably available education and outreach programs, including those provided by the University Extension Service or seed industry. And this goes back to the AIB recommendation for increased education of growers regarding the use of neonicotinoid treated seeds. Section 3.06 is storage. Return insecticide treated article seeds that are spilled during loading to the original seed lot container. And store insecticide treated article seeds away from food or feedstuff and protect and secure them from unauthorized access. And then lastly, the section on disposal. Unless being used for storage, dispose of insecticide treated article seeds in accordance with the seed bag label or by returning to the manufacturer. And do not recycle an insecticide treated article, compost any insecticide treated article seed, burn or otherwise incinerate, use treated seed for fuel or ethanol production purposes. So those are, again, because the whole thing is a recommendation, it's not enforceable. Those are the recommended practices for managing excess seed. So that's the set of BMPs that we'll be using as, I guess, the initial start of the rulemaking, pending any additional legislation that happens by the end of the session. So any comments or questions? Okay, well, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, the next thing on our agenda is, we talked a little bit in February about our strategy for a survey for 2024. And we made some good progress. So we had agreed as a board on a shorter version of the survey this year. So instead of the longer, more detailed questions, we came up with just 3, one being what county are you from, so we could get an idea of where we were, and then 2 that were trying to gauge where farmers' concerns were, basically, so that it could help guide us with what we might tackle next, in addition to, or taking into account what might come to us from the legislature as well. So we took advantage, so there's 2 things. So I went, Royce set us up with some great opportunities. So one is with Margaret Skinner, has a survey that's coming up. I don't have an exact date of when that's going to be disseminated, but her main audience is people who have large greenhouse, hoop house, that type of operations. And so we modified the questions slightly just to include things like plastic pots or greenhouse covers for plastic, just to give them specific examples that might be more relevant to their farming. And so that's coming up, and so we will be able to include our questions in with hers for that. But in the meantime, we had a training for, what was it specifically called? Agricultural pest.
It was the 1A training and private applicator training last Tuesday. Yes.
Which is run through UVM's pesticide safety and education program. And Sarah Kingsley Richards is the point person for that at UVM. And so she often, it's a virtual training. And so she was able to do our poll as our questions as a virtual poll during the training. And so we quickly, kind of as a great opportunity, got 55 responses. So I summarized them for us, which is, I believe, more than we got last year.
Yeah.
So this was about, 2 days work, not even, and we got more than we got last year, which is wonderful. So, oh gosh, I see something crazy, but I think you guys are seeing the right thing. So we got 55 answers. We did not get all counties represented. So you can see here, we did miss Caledonia, Washington, and Windsor County. Didn't have anybody, oh, and Essex County. Didn't have anybody attending this meeting. And then, so the first question we asked is, what environmental impacts are you concerned about when using agricultural inputs? They could pick any or all of these. One thing that was specific, because it was a Zoom poll, the other choice they couldn't explain. So they could only choose other. They had no ability to enter free text. So we listed PFAS, microplastics, and then non-target pollinator exposure. They did not see the examples in parentheses, partly just because it's a poll that's it's on a very small window. So we wanted to keep the choices to kind of minimum number of words. So they just saw non-target pollinator exposure, non-target beneficials exposure, non-target rodenticide exposure, and then disposal of farm materials. This one, they did see the parenthetical choices, and then other. So we received all 55 people responded to this question. And so they could select more than one, right? So I only just did straight numbers per choice right now. I didn't kind of massage the data in any other way. But so you can see non-target pollinator exposure and disposal of farm materials that are no longer useful kind of came to the top, and then the next two biggest concerns is non-target beneficial exposure and PFAS. Maybe microplastics is more than PFAS. Yep, microplastic edged out PFAS. And then the second and last question that they received is, what challenges do you face in reducing use of those agricultural inputs that cause you environmental concern? Not everybody responded to this one. We only received 51 responses. And then their choices were cost, and then availability of alternatives, knowing about the alternatives, the effectiveness of the alternatives, convenience of the alternatives, and then other. So with this one, the two most popular answers were availability and effectiveness of alternatives, with then cost, and then just knowing about the alternatives came to the top.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you say effectiveness of the alternatives, do you think people are thinking it's a separate pesticide product? Is it as effective? Or is the efficacy on reducing the impact of pollinators? You know what I mean? Like, how do you interpret it? I guess I don't know how to.
I guess we could dig into that, or we could reword the question for Margaret Skinner if you think that it needs
I could be off.
clarification. So I'm just going to repeat to make sure I'm understanding your question. So is it whether the alternative is as effective as your original,
yeah,
or whether the alternative is effective at decreasing your concern? Yeah, yeah. That's a good question. I don't know how people would have interpreted.
They could have interpreted it either way.
Yeah. But that's all I had, but at least as far as what we learned.
When's the Margaret Skinner?
I don't know, have an exact date yet. Not yet, and not next week.
Okay.
But does anybody have any thoughts or edits to the questions before we get a second go at it? I kind of took advantage of that opportunity because I knew that it was going to be on us next week. But if we have a chance before Margaret's survey gets shared, if members think or want to have different choices, or I'm not sure we're going to have more questions. I mean, maybe one more, but if members think that we should be digging into something else, or I'm open to suggestions.
When I look at those answers, though, it was all about exploring the alternatives. So if people have concerns, they showed you what the concerns were, but they were concerned about what are my alternatives and will they work? You know, when you think about coming up with education campaigns in response to change, that's the real hurdle, right? What is a realistic alternative going to be?
And what are the impacts of the alternative? Like, which isn't something that we asked I don't think we asked it in the survey. But so row cover versus pesticide application, or, I mean, you know, But however, row cover has other benefits, I think, related to heat, but they're, but still, yeah, like that's plastic, and how do you manage that plastic?
So our next item on the agenda, and this is we have until, so we are being joined by Dr. Eric Roy and his colleague Sarah Porterfield to talk about their microplastics research in Vermont. He works for University of Vermont and is doing microplastics research, and I won't steal his thunder too much, but I just thought that it would be nice for us to hear about some local research into a potential topic for us. And so he's coming, but however, he wasn't available until 3:15. So no matter what, you guys are stuck here until 3:15. So I know you guys are being really quiet today, but we have to use some time until Dr. Roy can join us.
Or
So
take a break and come back.
yeah, so we can take a break, but maybe because have these survey, perhaps we can talk about what we think, microplastics is a hot topic. It's definitely emerging. And so I was just wondering if any members had something to share, their thoughts, what they might want to learn more about.
Yeah, like just basic understanding currently about microplastics in agriculture. We could, Wendy Sue, I see you shaking your head up and down, so why don't you come off mute and tell us what you know?
Oh, I don't feel like I know that much. I have heard lots of reports and seen on Science News reports of where you can find microplastics, which is pretty much everywhere. But what that means, I'm not sure about. I would love us to have, to bring people in like Dr. Roy to tell us more about these topics so we can have a deeper understanding of it.
So I'd like to just jump in. I also feel like interested in knowing how other industries are handling their use in their businesses, and really researching in Vermont, because I find like, as we try to get into more and more recycling and getting rid of certain products, is Vermont ready for that? Because sometimes Vermont isn't ready to handle these kind of switches or the disposal of such. And so I'd like to know more about Vermont's infrastructure and how things can be handled, as well as for farms to change over to from the types of products that we're using, the options that are out there. And it has to be something that, again, is practical and it can evolve. I think that's going to be the biggest thing, is how did other industries transition and change, and how did they evolve, and the timeline in which they did it.
Amanda, do you have someone in particular that you're thinking of, like a specific industry that you're thinking of?
I have no, I mean, this has been talked about in agricultural circles, that this is coming, that this is going to be the next thing. But, I'm as interested as in everybody, because I have not done the research myself. And again, I don't know what other industries are doing and what other products are out there.
And are you talking specifically to microplastics, or
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, in anything that we talk about in the AIB, you could say, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But definitely on the microplastics. Yeah.
Go ahead, Wendy Sue. Mm,
There you go.
oh,
Sorry, the
Sorry.
system seems really slow to respond to things today. I did want to mention that um, one of the first papers I saw on microplastics was a woman, I think in Cornell, who was studying cadmium uptake by plants. And she ran into microplastics because they were facilitating the movement of the metal into the plant root. And she had some photos of the microplastics, little balls of plastic inside plant roots. So, I think it's, uh, anyways, I just wanted to share that thought. It's a problem.
how about some, just going back to that, I was gonna put up the concerns answers to help people think. So the biggest one is non-target pollinator exposure. I think that we'll probably address that definitely if the neonic bill passes and we are tasked with making a recommendation for best management practices for all neonics.
Mhm.
Outside of that, if that doesn't pass,
Still.
we should still,
Yeah, me
looking like this should still be a topic
Yeah,
that
yeah,
we might
absolutely.
need to address.
Yeah.
Does anybody have ideas I'm asking kind of selfishly for planning, like who do we want to hear from? What do we want to know?
Was Ryan still on?
We might have Ryan for,
Yeah, I'm on
Yeah.
here. Yeah, I think, when I see that, I think of obviously expanding beyond just bees and into a couple other taxa. We have probably enough information to identify some pollinator species that we might be concerned about their exposure, and that might be a place to start and see what we know about those species and their likelihood of visiting or pollinating some of these crop species, and then maybe take it from there.
Right, and sort of expand that a little bit. One of the recommendations for the AIB was to, improve pollinator habitat. And I think, just speaking personally, I think that's something the agency needs to get a lot more involved in. We actually have a meeting coming up with the Agency of Transportation, I think it's next week, to talk about how they could get involved. And Ryan and I have been communicating by email about having a meeting about that too. And Ryan, I haven't responded to your email yet, but I will. So, but I think that could be related to this, but non-managed pollinators should be an important topic for the AIB to look at, both for exposure and also for, well, for all the aspects of them. So, but as far as planning goes, Morgan, I think it would be Ryan and me, and whoever else, to be thinking about what to put in there.
and Ryan, I know you have to leave soon, so I want to just ask to make sure I heard you right. So you're thinking of using information that's available to narrow our focus to like a few specific pollinator species?
Yeah, species or groups of pollinators. Just, I guess that's the first thing that comes to mind for maybe focusing the discussion a little bit. But in addition to what Steve mentioned too, pollinator habitat it should be part of this as well.
Right. I mean, just for the purposes of conversation, I mean, what comes to mind are, bees that are, one thing we could look at pretty easily, I think, would be what's happening with bees that pollinate blueberries, for example. you know, they're, Ryan, do you know offhand which bees would be the ones to look at there?
I could pull up a list pretty easily, but not off the top of my head. But yeah, I could put something like that together.
Yeah, but I mean, that could be a good system to look at because they're, you know, blueberries are pollinated most effectively by, I think, bumblebees. And, you know, a couple different species of bumblebees, and we do have a blueberry industry that I think is growing in Vermont. It's expanding, and it's kind of a good fit. So that could be a good model to look at about what's happening with, you know, with those insects and what's affecting them and how to manage them and how to make them, you know, improve their populations and that kind of thing.
Is that all high bush blueberry?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
You too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the normal blueberry. I just wanted to make sure.
Not rabbit eyes.
Does anybody know if, I'm sorry, Adrian, I just wanted to know about the blueberry market. Is it the same as low bush management? Because I was just going back to the pesticides used in low bush.
I don't know. I mean, we can certainly get, you know, people can talk about it.
Does anybody else have any thoughts or further things about to address this kind of number one concern that's coming out of this small survey for pollinator exposure? It looks like after that, it's about disposal of farm materials that are no longer useful.
Right, bale wrap.
Yeah.
I can say on the tires piece, there were duplicate bills introduced this year. However, they didn't make it out of committee regarding addressing tire waste in the state of Vermont. So introduced, kept to the wall, didn't make it. But they were the same bills, and one in the House and one in the Senate. But still, I don't think they're going to come off the wall this year, but potentially it could be reintroduced next year. So just sharing that information.
And they're about tire disposal.
Yeah. I think creating a extended producer responsibility program to address tire waste.
Yeah. I don't know to ask this question. It could be a can of worms, but do members feel that we? Okay, I was going to ask, should we look into PFAS? Second question, should we wait to look into PFAS until if the bill passes, then we have more clearly defined terms to look into PFAS after the report?
Well, my suggestion is we're going to be working on this report. I mean, it's going to be a joint effort with Department of Health, DEC, and I think we should schedule a report on the report, like toward the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, you know, just sort of a check-in about where we're at, and then depending on what's coming out of it, I think there might be things for AIB to look at.
So you mean a report to AIB for them to
AIB.
have feedback before the report's due to the list?
Yeah, but also just keep everybody informed. I mean, by then you ought to have a pretty good idea where you're headed, I would hope. You know, and maybe even have DEC come, you know, and
Yep.
be part of the discussion. And Sarah's already involved, so.
Yep. Great, this is good, I have some good, kind of things.
So, or have a suggestion.
Yep,
I'm gonna take a break for now.
I like that.
And everybody come back at 3 o'clock. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yep, so can I get, some thumbs up? So we're gonna come back at 3 o'clock.
All right, thank you, everybody.